realms interacting with different places in time and space. And that the primary message is this movement from God in heaven coming to earth, all right? So we're looking at that, and also that it's primarily for the first century church. Some have talked to me and said, wow, that's kind of a whole, I never thought about it that way. I always thought that you read Revelation to try to interpret current news events. You know, where do I find this latest event, and what's happening in Israel, and what's happening in the stock market? Where do I find it in Revelation? But we want to remember that there was very clearly a group of first century Christians, and God wanted to speak to them, all right? So, here we go. So last week, as we finished up, let's go to that slide there, yeah. We were talking about Pergamum, and just in case you didn't get some of the things because the recording cut off, I wanted to kind of finish up with some of this, especially this guy here. So at Pergamum, last week, you remember, we read the letter to Pergamum, and we talked about the importance of Pergamum of medicine, especially that it was the legendary birthplace of Galen, the physician, the beginning of the Hippocratic Oath, and all of the things that were happening there, and that this guy over here on the left is the god Aesclepius. You can see that his symbol is the staff and the stake, still used as the acanthus symbol in the medical field. And that in Pergamum was this massive Aesclepion, or a temple for the worship of Aesclepius. And that's important because Aesclepion is one of the primary gods that in the Hellenistic world was worshipped in a lot of the cities. And it becomes a very important figure both in Revelation and in John's Gospel. All right, so we're going to kind of keep in mind that the Johannine literature is dealing a lot with this guy right here. So the healing miracles that take place in John's Gospel are meant to very clearly distinguish the power of Jesus versus the power of Aesclepius. We talked a bit about that last week. Let me just review that. So here in Pergamum, to visit the Aesclepion, if you went and asked the god for healing, you would stay in sort of a hospital, kind of a dormitory area. And when you went down to the area for healing with the gods, you had to walk down this long corridor that's up here on the right. And as you were walking down that long corridor, the priests of Aesclepius would actually be calling to you down through those openings there. Keep going, it was this very mystical kind of experience. And there were various inhalants that you would take that would, kind of alter your experience and really make it fun. But when you got to the end, you would bow before the god there, and there would often be some kind of washing and various rituals and things that would take place. And if we go to the next slide, we talked about this of how if you had been healed by Aesclepius, you would say a thank you. You would give a gift offering to Aesclepius of taking clay and making a representation of whatever body part or ailment you were healed of. So whether that was your arms, your legs, your womb, your brain, your eyes, whatever it was that Aesclepius had healed, you gave a thank offering made out of clay. Okay, so interesting. So remember a couple of the distinct healing miracles in John's Gospel that we find only there, not in Matthew, Mark, or Luke, the synoptic Gospels, but only in John. And then we come back and go, wait a minute, John is writing his Gospel and Revelation about the same time while he's living in Ephesus. He's in Asia Minor. He's writing to believers. The same audience as Revelation is the audience that receives John's Gospel. And in that gospel, he's making some very clear points that parallel the points in Revelation. One of the points being the Jerusalem temple is destroyed. What are we going to do now? And so Jesus has this dialogue with a Samaritan woman who says, where do we worship? Gerizim, Jerusalem, what are we going to do? And Jesus' response, that God is spirit. We worship in spirit and in truth. He's giving the answer, wherever a believer is, the Spirit is there with them. So he's answering a question that late first century believers had through an interaction with a Samaritan woman. But then you get to, in chapters 8 and 9, there's a couple of healing miracles. You have a man that is near a pool, okay? And, okay, what's going on here? He's at this pool, and it's an odd It's an odd interaction here. It says that he was laying by the pool of Bethesda, and he couldn't get into the water, but the expectation was that an angel would stir up the water, and whoever got in the pool first, Marco Polo, you jump in, and whoever got in the water would be healed. Well, where do we find anywhere in Scripture about that? It's a weird story. There's nothing there. And the odd thing is, Jesus doesn't tell the guy, get in the pool. What does he do? He walks up to him and says, do you want to be healed? In kind of a weird way, almost like, what are you doing here? Now you see the symbol of the snake right there. That's a column at the Aesclepian temple in Pergamum. That exact symbol was discovered in archaeological excavations at the Pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem. Hold up. Are we to understand that perhaps because the Fortress Antonia, where Roman soldiers were stationed right near the Temple Mount, that within a stone's throw of God's temple, there was a temple to Aesclepius in Jerusalem in the first century. And this guy is laying on his mat. And Jesus is like, what are you doing? He's like, he asks him, do you really want to be healed? So he doesn't tell him get in the water. He says, what? Pick up your pallet, walk, and go show yourself to the priest. In other words, get up and walk out of here, go to the real temple where the priests of God are, and go and confirm your healing. So in that healing, the man is being healed not just of being unable to walk. Jesus is calling him back to his faith in the God of Israel and saying, get out of Aesclepius. Jesus has another interaction, this time with a blind man, a man that had been blind since birth. And in this also odd thing that only appears in John, Jesus takes clay. He spits on the ground and then rubs it in the guy's eyes. I mean, first of all, gross, but I think there's a point there. He's making clay, putting it in the man's eyes, and then he can see. Any reader in the first century would go, oh, Aesclepius. Clay is the way that we show thanks to Aesclepius. What is Jesus doing? In the readers of John's gospel and Revelation, one of the things John wants to make it clear is to his Jewish readers that Jesus is God. This is Yahweh incarnate. He also wants to make it clear that Jesus is superior to all of the Hellenistic deities. So we're going to see that throughout Revelation. We're going to touch on some of that tonight in the other cities. But also in John's gospel, which is paralleling the message, he gives 7 times that Jesus makes a statement about I am, linking him to the great I am that appeared in the burning bush to Moses. And 7 times Jesus performs a miracle. Every one of those miracles aligns with showing him to be more powerful than the Greek deities. In this case, when he makes eyes, he takes clay. Where in the Hebrew Bible, in the tradition, do we have clay being made into life? Genesis 2:7. The Lord God took the clay from the ground, breathed into it, and Adam became a living nephesh, a living being. So in one miracle, Jesus is making the statement, he's creating eyes out of clay, I am God. He's creating clay and putting the eyes in. He's saying, I'm superior to Aesclepius. And then, this time, he tells him to go and wash in the pool. But not the pool of Bethesda, the pool of Siloam. Because the pool of Siloam was a mikveh, where the Jews would go for ritual bathing, for purification, before they went and worshiped God in the temple. Both of those miracles end with God saying, with Jesus saying, go worship the real God. Go to the right place. So, so we kind of finished that up with Pergamum. What's our next slide there? Yep, we got that. Pergamum, yes, question. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Great question. All right, so Ray's question is, Jesus in the letter to Pergamum, the message to Pergamum says it's where Satan's throne is. What is he talking about there? Is it metaphorical, or is it somehow in the spiritual realm where Satan's throne is? So we have three possibilities there. One is Aesclepius, because it was the largest Asclepian in the ancient world. So there could be something there. We see the symbolism of the serpent that is part of Aesclepius. That's possible. But also, so that was down in the lower city where the people were. In the Acropolis, the upper city of Pergamum, there was the massive altar to Zeus. So it could be the Pergamon altar, which was the largest one outside of Olympian Zeus in Greece. You also had, Pergamum was chosen as the first city in Asia Minor to have a temple built to the Roman Caesar, to Tiberius. And so there's really three that could be made a good argument. Is he talking about the Asclepian, the altar to Zeus, or the temple to the Roman emperor? Or maybe all three combined, right? I mean, all three of those, if we take the word, we're going to come across this later in the text of Antichristos, the Antichrist. But Antichristos in Greek does not mean opposed to, it means other than. So the Antichrist really is something that is other than Christ that I'm giving my worship to. It doesn't necessarily mean a single individual that is in conflict with Jesus, rather anything other than Christ. And all three of those were other than Christ's. Okay? Good question. Yeah, Pam. Yeah. Good. Okay, so Pam's question is about the white stone with the new name written on it in verse 17. Where are we here? 2:17.
Verse 17 of the letter to the Pergamum. So that's, chapter 2, I guess.
Yes. All right, good. Yeah, I did mention about that. Cool. So let's talk about that. So the question is about, what about the white stone with a new name on it that no one can understand? Okay, I don't have that slide on there because it was from last week, but let's talk about that one. Okay, so Pergamum, one of the things that they were very well known for, and one of their major exports was parchment, which was animal skins that had been tanned and scraped and made into leather-bound books for codex instead of the scroll. So, but parchment, as it was left out in the elements and stuff, would become brittle and dry out, whereas a stone would be something that would not dry out. Also, we have, let's see, trying to remember. Go to the next slide, Kelly, if you would, please. Good. Yeah, right there. Isaiah chapter 62. In Isaiah 62, there is a prophecy there that the prophet gives. Here we go. The whole thing is about the restoration of Zion, the restoration of Jerusalem. Okay? In the prophecy, nations will see your vindication. And then as Isaiah, this is before the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, but he looks beyond and says in Isaiah 62 verse 2, nations will see your vindication, kings will see your splendor, you will be called by a new name that the Lord himself will give you. You will be a majestic crown in the hand of the Lord, a royal turban in the hand of your God. And it goes through that whole chapter is about the restoration of Jerusalem, which the whole book of Revelation, when we get to the end, is the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. So giving them a new name is prophetically, that is speaking of the restoration that God has promised through the prophet Isaiah for Jerusalem and for its inhabitants. Okay? Yeah, good questions. Okay. So let's go to, we got Sardis next. Is that where we're at? Hold on to that real quick. So we're going to see a couple of Old Testament figures. one of the things that we want to be aware of here is some of the spiritual wrestling that is going on in the scriptures and in Revelation are very important for us to be aware of. The people were living in this time where Jerusalem had been destroyed by the Babylonians, and one of the questions was why? Why would God allow this to happen? Why would God allow his temple, his holy city, to be destroyed? And where was God now? If the Spirit of God was dwelling in the Holy of Holies and it's now burned to the ground, where is God? Well, the Christians could say, well, the Spirit of God now dwells with us. They'd been living in that reality since Pentecost, because Pentecost happened not in an upper room, but at the temple courts, and the Spirit of God came out of the temple, the same one where the veil had been torn. The Spirit comes out of the temple. They're all sitting in the courts, because that's where every Jew was on Shavuot, on Pentecost Sunday, and the Spirit rests on them. So the Christian Jews already knew, well, that's where the Spirit of God is now. But for those who were still wanting to practice their Judaism, and they're thinking, oh, what does this mean? How do we do this? And they went back to the prophetic books that were after the exile when Babylon had destroyed. So 586, Babylon destroys the city of Jerusalem and the temple. So they look back and they say, well, what did the prophets Ezekiel, Daniel, Joel, Jeremiah, what did they say about why the city fell and why Judea was destroyed? So those books rise in importance, and they begin to look into those books in the first century to answer, why did Rome come? And some of the things that they kept coming up with was the people at that time had fallen into immorality. And so they looked at the Hellenistic world that Alexander the Great had brought in. They looked at all of the ways that these different deities and things. And there was a couple that stood out. First of all, obviously, idolatry, worshiping foreign gods. Second, immorality, specifically sexual immorality that was often tied to idolatry. A lot of the practices of both Babylonian and Hellenistic religion included these practices at the temple that were part of worship of these foreign deities, especially fertility rituals, okay? Makes sense. The other thing was this, some of the things that were happening in Greek culture, Roman culture that we will talk about that becomes a big deal. Some of it was simply the worship of the body, the worship of humanity, which in the Ten Commandments it says, don't make any graven image. Well, you walk through any Greek city, statues everywhere of gods, of emperors, of all of these things. I mean, you're surrounded by violations of the Second Commandment and the First Commandment. So those are some of the things. So a couple of figures that are kind of minor in the Old Testament become major because the prophets that talk about these figures and the people in our time period, first century, say this is where it all started. So we've got this guy Balaam in Numbers 22. Balak hires Balaam to come over from Mesopotamia and curse the Israelites. And he's like, well, it's going to cost you. All right. So right there, Balaam becomes a big deal. For money, he agrees to come and curse the Israelites. Balaam shows up in Jude. Balaam shows up in 2 Peter. He's a big character there, representing false teachers that are willing to sell their prophecy for money. And he shows up in the letter to to Pergamum as well. The error of Balaam. Okay, so the error of Balaam is basically to trade money for false worship. Balaam, for a large sum, says, I agree that I'm going to come and curse Israel. But then God doesn't let him. He ends up blessing Israel. But here's the problem. You get to the very next chapter. After all, it looks like all is well. Balaam has actually praised God. Balak is upset. But the very next chapter says, and the people began to sin against God in sexual immorality and idolatry. So there's this weird deal that's going on that almost as if Balaam's intention leaked through and caused problems for the Israelites. That's one of the places where they're going back and the prophets are saying, aha, here's where it is. So we bring that into the first century. Balaam is doing this, and in Numbers 25, and that's where you have the people sin. And we have this scene where Phinehas, the righteous Phinehas, the priest, actually sees an Israelite man sinning with a Canaanite woman, and he takes a spear and drives through both of them at the same time because of the activity they were involved in there. This one didn't make an episode of VeggieTales. I don't remember the righteous Phinehas came with a spear. That just didn't work for VeggieTales. You can read it yourself. It's one of those dicey sections of Scripture. But anyway, that becomes a big deal there. Okay, we better go on. Let's go on to the next slide there. Because tonight we're going to see a couple of new figures, including, Jezebel makes an appearance tonight. So let's go to our next church, which is in Thyatira. And so here we go. Let's look at Thyatira. They are chapter 2, verse 18. To the angel of the church in Thyatira write the following. This is the solemn pronouncement of the Son of God, the one who has eyes like a fiery flame and whose feet are like polished bronze. I know your deeds, your love, faith, service, and steadfast endurance. In fact, your more recent deeds are greater than your earlier ones. But I have this against you. You tolerate that woman, Jezebel, another Old Testament figure, who calls herself a prophetess, and by her teaching deceives my servants to commit sexual immorality and eat food sacrificed to idols. There we go, the big two showing up again. I have given her time to repent, but she's not willing to repent of her sexual immorality. Look, I am going to throw her onto a bed of illness and those who commit adultery with her into terrible suffering unless they repent of her deeds. Furthermore, I will strike her followers with a deadly disease. A lot of Jezebel stuff here. And then all the churches will know that I am the one who searches minds and hearts. I will repay each one of you what your deeds deserve. But to the rest of you in Thyatira, all who do not hold to this teaching, who have not learned the so-called deep secrets of Satan, to you I say, I do not put any additional burden on you. However, hold on to what you have until I come. And to the one who conquers and continues in my deeds until the end, I will give him authority over the nations. He will rule them with an iron rod, and like clay jars, he will break them to pieces. Just as I have received the right to rule from my Father, and I will give him the morning star. The one who has an ear, hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Okay, so Thyatira has a Jezebel problem. Question. I am reading NET, New English Translation. And the reason I like New English Translation, I'll give a little plug for them. So in my U version, as I'm going through the electronic text, there's little buttons there that I can click that highlight, a little thing comes up and gives some of the Greek words and things like that. I get nerdy about stuff like that. I like some of those things. However, ESV, CSB, these are also good. NRSV is good. But I happen to be reading out of NET. So, New English Translation. So here we go. So they are encouraged that Jesus, the one whose eyes are like fire and feet like burnished bronze, which is reminiscent of the vision in Daniel 10 of the statue that he sees with feet like burnished bronze. Jesus, in this case, he's going to one of those post-exilic prophets, one of those that dealt with the destruction of Babylon. And he's saying, when Daniel had this vision, it was of me. I am the one whose feet are like burnished bronze. And so he's encouraging them that their works of love, faith, service, and endurance, and that they're increasing. Good job, Thyatira. They're looking good until we get to talking about Jezebel. All right, so who was Jezebel in the Old Testament? All right, we have the northern tribes of Israel, and Ahab becomes the king of the northern tribes. They are bordering along the northern border of Israel with Lebanon, Syria, those countries to the north. Okay, in the ancient world, Lebanon was also called Tyre and Sidon. And so we have the king of Tyre and Sidon that is there, and his daughter is Jezebel. She marries King Ahab. King Ahab looks at this and says, "Hey, this will be a good link up here. It'll be politically advantageous and financially advantageous. We're going to kind of make a little power base here." But instead, when Jezebel arrives, she brings the worship of foreign deities. She brings specifically the worship of Baal and Asherah. Now, Baal and Asherah are a Canaanite deities that are a pair. Baal is a male god who represents the rain that comes, and Asherah is the female god that represents the growth of crops. So as Baal comes and brings the rain and the lightning and the storms, Asherah produces the growth that comes up from the ground, okay? Well, that all sounds kind of quaint to a 21st century audience, but if you and I were agriculturalists and we were counting on the growth of crops to feed our family, then the rain would be a really big deal. And you are living in an area that didn't have a major river. There's no Euphrates, no Tigris, no Nile, and so you count on the rain for your survival. So you look and you see your neighbor is over here giving offerings to Baal. You're thinking, maybe I ought to do a little of that just to make sure the rain comes. And your other neighbor over here is offering to Asherah, making sure that the crops grow and the animals can be fed and the people can be fed. Maybe I ought to mix in a little bit of that. And so the whole story of Elijah versus the prophets of Baal, Ahab, and Jezebel is about who are you trusting? Who are you trusting your family to? It's not just kind of, some crazy satanic ritual or something. These are the gods that were quite practical. Rain and crops. That's what Baal and Asherah were in charge of. Elijah is calling the people of Israel back to God and saying, no, one God, Yahweh alone, covers all of it. You can trust in him. And so that whole encounter on Mount Carmel, what do? They put water on the altar, all of the things. God calls fire from heaven. Well, it's supposed to be Baal is the guy in charge of lightning. And so you have this whole scene where Elijah is proving Yahweh to be more powerful than Baal and Asherah. However, what we find here is the spirit of Jezebel. What did Jezebel do? Now, I know that oftentimes the word Jezebel gets linked with just sexual immorality. And there's even some videos making the rounds right now of the spirit of Jezebel that has taken over women in our country and things. I've not seen a lot of women going around saying, let's worship Baal, let's worship Asherah, let's sacrifice to them. It gets linked with sexual immorality mostly because of this verse in Revelation. Okay, fair enough. I think the whole idea of what's going on there is what Jezebel really was doing is she used her influence over King Ahab to try to say, let's have all of Israel worship the Canaanite gods instead of Yahweh, the God of Israel. So there's much more going on in terms of idolatry. And so when we go to the first century, however, we do find that the Hellenistic deities that were connected with fertility often included rituals with immorality that was being practiced in the temple. So the Christians, just like the people of Israel, were saying, well, we're worshiping Jesus, but our neighbors are also worshiping these other gods. Maybe we ought to make sure the bases are covered and do both. And so you have Christians that have a foot in both worlds. They're on Sunday going and worshiping Jesus and exalting him as Lord. On the other days of the week, they're sacrificing to other idols. They're participating in the rituals that happen at the temple, and they're being drawn into immorality and idolatry. Now, we bring that fast forward to our world, and there is a case to be made of we live in a world where sensuality and these kinds of things and do what you want is really a spirit of the day. And you could say that has some connections with what Jezebel was trying to do in the church here. Because it appears that what Jezebel was doing in the church in Thyatira is that maybe you had actually a woman prophetess that was saying to the Christians, that's great that you worship Jesus that day of the week, but if you do some other worship the other days, it's no big deal. It's really no big deal. So the message that Jesus is giving to the church at Thyatira is, you gotta pick a side here. That was the question that Elijah said to the people. We're going to do a contest, Yahweh versus Baal, and you got to choose. Is Baal God or is Yahweh God? Jesus is saying the same thing to the church at Thyatira. Are you all in for Jesus? Or are you worshiping the world and the world's ways and the Hellenistic deities? And with that, practicing things that God has said are sinful. So that's kind of what we have going on in the idea of what's happening with Jezebel and that she will be judged. Interesting thing there, they're giving the promise of authority over nations. We'll get to that when we get to the judgment that happens and how Christians will actually be on those thrones judging along with Christ, and we'll look at that. But then they're given a promise of the morning star. Numbers 24:17, which ironically is part of those prophecies of Baalam, is a star shall rise out of Jacob, which was something that was kind of known in the Babylonian world that seems to be one of the reasons the Magi made their way to the region of Jacob asking, where is he that is born King of the Jews? How in the world would Babylonian astrologers know about that? Possibly by reading the writings of one of their forefathers, a Magi in Babylon named Daniel. Daniel was one of the wise men of the court of Nebuchadnezzar who rose to be second in power because he could interpret dreams and prophesy the future. So if Daniel shows up and continues to share about the scriptures of Israel and continues to pray, and included in that was one of the prophecies of Balaam in Numbers 24, and then 400 years later, you have these magi that say, we've been watching the heavens, and there's a sign that there's going to be someone royal in the house of Jacob. It matches with the prophecy. What are we going to do? Let's go. They don't go to Bethlehem, right? They first go to the capital, Jerusalem. They show up in Jacob. Well, where would you look for the one born King of the Jews? Let's go to the capital, of course. And there they find out from the religious leaders, well, Bethlehem is actually where we expect the Messiah. And the wise men make their way down south. There's a very interesting circle of exile, Daniel, Ezekiel, Magi, stars in the sky, coming back, nations coming to worship at the feet of Jesus. Ironically, the wise men make the journey from Jerusalem to Bethlehem while the religious leaders stay in Bethlehem and cozy up to the seat of power with Herod the Great and give their homage to him while the foreign dignitaries make their way down and worship the Jewish Messiah. Ironic.
Hey, Scott,
Yes, sir.
talking about Jezebel.
Yes.
We also, because the punishment for this is very harsh.
Yes, it is.
And when you go back to what happened to Jezebel, because it's almost, doesn't the story with Jehu, he says, the dogs will lick your blood.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not something that Jesus, he's rather intolerant to this, so to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah, good. Yeah, Ray's saying, that obviously the punishment is very harsh for Jezebel. And you're right, back in 2 Kings, the punishment was very harsh that she fell out of the tower and the dogs were licking her blood and all kinds of stuff. And so she met with a very untimely and violent death. And in this case, the idea of being on a bed of, we could ask, are these STDs? Are these, what exactly is going on here? And that all of those who were around her were also being punished. So we do have some things that it's a pretty harsh punishment, and the Christians are being told, hey, I think the real message there is don't dabble in worship of foreign gods, foreign deities, and the practices associated with that. Stay true to the things that God has asked you to do. Let's take a look at some Thyatira stuff. So go to the next slide there. Thyatira is another one of these that is built, the modern city has been built over the ancient city. So you come to visit some of the ruins, and you're right in the middle of apartment buildings and various things there. So I don't have a whole lot to show you in terms of archaeology with Thyatira. But one of the things that Thyatira is well known for, if we go to the next slide, is the color purple. In fact, we know someone from Thyatira in the book of Acts. Lydia, the seller of purple, is from Thyatira. She's journeyed across the Aegean Sea. She's in Philippi. And when Paul comes and is at a place of prayer by the water where there would be ritual immersion, he meets Lydia, shares with Lydia the gospel. She becomes the very first European convert to Christianity. And the church in Philippi starts meeting in her home, indicating that she perhaps was the very first pastor in Europe. Oh, that's interesting. But Lydia, we're also told, was a seller of purple cloth from Thyatira. Thyatira was well known for that. In fact, they were pretty good at the knockoffs. So up in the top left-hand corner are Murex shells. The Murex shells that would be on the coastline of Tyre and Sidon. If you go back to the time of the Phoenicians realized that these little critters had a purple dye inside of them. And you could use that purple dye to make incredibly beautiful purple cloth that royalty would wear. That was the Chanel, that was the Gucci, that was the real high-end stuff. If you couldn't quite afford the high-end, you would get Thyatiran cloth, which was made from the madder root. The roots that are there, those could be crushed into a powder, made into a dye, and the cloth could be put in there, and you would get the purple cloth. Or here's a guy, even today they sell Turkish red is the cloth that you can buy in Istanbul. All right, so Thyatira. So interesting that we see that about being clothed and this kind of thing in the church at Thyatira. All right, let's go on to Sardis and see what the message is to Sardis. To the angel of the church in Sardis, write the following. This is the solemn pronouncement of the one who holds the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. I know your deeds, that you have a reputation that you are alive, but in reality, you are dead. Oh man, buckle up, because Sardis, they're going to get it here. This is one of the churches that there is nothing good said about them. Oh boy. Here we go. I know your deeds. You have a reputation that you're alive, but in reality you are dead. Wake up then and strengthen what remains that was about to die, because I have not found your deeds complete in the sight of my God. Therefore remember what you received and heard, and obey it, and repent. If you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will never know at what hour I will come against you. But you have a few individuals in Sardis who have not stained their clothes. They will walk with me dressed in white, because they are worthy. The one who conquers will be dressed like them in white clothing. I will never erase his name from the book of life, but will declare his name before my Father and before the angels. The one who has an ear, hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So let's talk about Sardis, okay? So the 7 spirits and the 7 stars is an interesting one, because there's not a really clear delineation of what the 7 spirits are about. We do know that in Isaiah 11:2, it talks about 7 facets of the Spirit of God. But the first one is just the Spirit of God, the Spirit of truth, the Spirit of wisdom, the Spirit of grace. So you have 7 attributes. That's possibly what the 7 spirits are. It also has been sometimes interpreted as the 7 angels, that each one of these churches has an angel that is protecting and overseeing that church. So the idea of the 7 spirits of God could be the 7-fold, the 7 aspects of God's Holy Spirit, or it could be the 7 angels that are air. Now, they are encouraged. It's really not an encouragement. You have a reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Wow, a dead church. Have you ever had the joy of attending a dead church? What fun. Come and love Jesus with us. It's just a beautiful experience. Man, unfortunately, we can probably all think of dead churches. And sometimes they're nice people. Sometimes they're not so nice people. But the worship is kind of the preaching is And to me, I think actually one of the things that I worry about with the church is if the preaching is just kind of then it's not bad enough that the people want to leave, but it's not good enough that anybody's growing. And you just end up with a church like Sardis, where it's just and people say, I've been going here for 20 years and I really haven't learned anything new or grown. I'm just kind of the same that I was. That's where we find Sardis. They even had a reputation of being alive, but it was a dead church. Wake up, strengthen what remains. There's still time. There's still a little bit left, but you need to snap out of it. And so I wonder if perhaps, Sardis was maybe a church that started with a lot of joy, and then they figured they were going to keep running on that same joy, okay? I've had an opportunity to sit with various leadership, either in interviews or with church boards and various things. And one of the questions I like to ask church boards is, tell me about the glory days of this church. And it's kind of a test because, some churches, Pastor, the 80s were so good. And man, there was just revival and it was all that. I'm always looking for, is there someone at least on the board who says, we believe the best days are yet to come. And we're still looking forward and not living in the past. There's a joke out there, how many Nazarenes does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, all right? But it actually takes 6, 1 to change the light bulb, and 5 to stand there and talk about how grand and glorious that old light bulb was and how we're going to miss it. And sometimes churches do that. We sort of get stuck in, the glory days were there, instead of asking, God, keep doing new things. Keep us fresh. Keep us alive. Keep bringing new things. We're looking forward. It doesn't mean we forget about the past and we don't honor those legacies, but we move forward. You are dead, wake up. I will come like a thief. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Some have soiled their clothes. You'll be given white robes and name in the book of life. So Sardis, let's go to the next slide, has some very good archaeology in it. So here we see the city of Sardis down below, and you'll see that mountain up above. Sardis is also one that has a lower city and an acropolis, an upper city as well. The upper city actually was a very high mountain, a defensible position, and the people of Sardis knew that if their city came under siege, they could escape and go up on the hill, which they had done several times. And so they had escaped and made their way up to the hill, and that was the place where they could defend. Now, like these other cities, on the bottom, there was temples to other deities and various things. We never really get a whole lot of that. They're not admonished for having problems with false. They're just kind of dead. They're just kind of going through. And this whole idea of waking up. A couple of things that we know about the history of Sardis. In AD 17 and again in AD 60, Sardis was hit with earthquakes. Both times the earthquakes happened in the middle of the night. And even though there had been kind of shakings and tremors and this kind of thing, the people ignored that. And because of that, the destruction, when it happened, many more people were killed because they were sleeping in their homes when the earthquake hit. So we have this idea of be careful at night when things happen. Are you ready? We also have, if you go back a couple hundred years earlier, King Croesus was the king of Sardis. And he was very wealthy because of the coins that they were minting. And so they came under attack by the Persians. Well, King Croesus and his people went up onto the upper city. And at the upper city, they thought, we are protected. No one can get to us. We're fine. All right? And the legend goes that the Persians couldn't get up there. They were trying to besiege the city. They couldn't do it. But one soldier noticed a Sardinian who dropped his helmet over the wall. And then he watched as the Sardinian appeared in some bushes coming out of a tunnel, and then went and grabbed his helmet and went back up on the walls. And so the Persian took note of where those bushes were, and that night went to the bushes, crept up inside, and took the city. Kind of a funny thing then. So they took the city, and so now King Croesus is up on the upper city. He's under guard, and they begin to burn the lower city. And the Persian asks King Croesus, "What is it like to see your city burn before you?" To which Croesus replies, "Oh, it's not my city anymore. That's your city now." So, yeah. Greek humor, am I right? All right, so in Sardis, you have a couple of very interesting things that relate to some of the things we've talked about. So go to the next slide there. And in this is a massive Roman bathhouse that was in Sardis. In a lot of these cities, the bathhouse was the main place where business dealings took place, where the guys hung out. This was the stadium of the day. And so the men would go to the bathhouse, and that would be kind of the civic center where they would have a lot of discussions. The bathhouse was also connected to the gymnasium, and gymnasium in Greek. And that's where all the sports would be done, okay? This was all going back to Alexander the Great. Wherever he established a Hellenistic city, he would build temples to the Greek gods. He would build a school that taught Greek language, Koine Greek, and how to read Homer and these various things. He would create a theater where there would be the entertainments of the Greek theater, and he would build a bathhouse and a gymnasium for sports. So interesting, religion, education, entertainment, and sports. We are still living in Alexander the Great's world. But what he would do by doing that was import Greek culture. So still in the Roman period, this was what would take place. The bathhouse and the gymnasium, the men would go, but all of the sports, the word gymnos in Greek means naked, without clothing. So in the bathhouse, all the sports would be done clothing free. The symbol of the covenant for the Jewish people going back to Abraham was circumcision. So if you were a Jewish dude and you went to the bathhouse, and you went to the gymnasium, everybody knew it. Okay? I'll put that delicately. Everybody could tell who the Jewish guys were. And they were teased because the Greeks were like, "Why have you mutilated yourself?" They thought that was weird. So it created a tension for Jews because this was there. Here's the ironic thing. Go to the next slide. Right across from this bathhouse and gymnasium was the largest synagogue that has been found in the ancient world. You could seat up to 1,000 for Sabbath worship in this synagogue. Here's kind of the ironic thing with this. So you can see the picture there is of the ark where the Torah scrolls would be held, and it is on the wall that is facing towards the west. So, it's on the wall facing towards the east, and so the Torah scrolls would be there. And then now I'm kind of, on this picture here, I'm standing looking into, you can see the size of this massive synagogue. So the ironic thing would be this, the Jews would